So, first of all, obviously thank you for the introduction, and I just want to make it very, very clear that these comments are completely not my comments, and I don't necessarily agree with these comments, but I think it's really important to consider the context that these provide when we look at some of the amazing initiatives that were spoken about already this morning. We've heard from Shona, we've heard from Xavier, and what's great about it is the ideas and the ambitions of the people, and how we're very much focused on driving patient outcomes and improving it. But I think why this is really important is because this is the context in which we operate. So very much this is the backdrop against which we're working and trying to build these relationships. And by doing that, it makes it really difficult. But I don't want to talk about bad pharma. I want to focus much more on good pharma. I want to focus on what I believe to be the future of healthcare communications. And a really important concept, and that's around who cares wins. And that's really starting to think about the patient at the start and the end of our communications plan, and really putting them at the heart of what we see and what we do. And the thing for me is, as Tim alludes, Chief Executive of Havas Lynx, I've been with them for 15 years. I started as an office junior, and I've worked in healthcare for 10 years, and I take a real pride in some of the work that we've done, whether it's been in mental health, oncology, infectious disease. We've had some great ideas, some real innovations, and we've made a real impact on patients' life. So I take real pride in what we do, but I'm also frustrated by the backdrop under which we do it. But I think the key thing for this conversation and this talk is really about this concept of a marriage between ethical and commercial drivers. I think it's not only beneficial for patients, but it's beneficial for business. And I think we can start to look at how we can both drive our profits, but also drive patient outcomes. I think it's absolutely possible to benefit shareholders at the same time as we benefit healthcare professional stakeholders. However, before we go into good pharma in the future and my recommendations and my philosophy, I think it's really important that we look at what we've done wrong. I think it's really important that we drill into some of those comments and have a think about what we can learn and how we can drive it forward. We're often accused of choosing profit over people. We know this is ridiculous because without profit we can't have funding. Without funding we can't have R&D. Without R&D we can't advance medicine. So I'm very happy to turn around and say yes, we're in this to drive profits, but we're also in this to drive treatments and benefit patients. We're also accused of talking about image and choosing image over honesty. Apparently we're more concerned with creating pictures and ads of happy smiley patients than actually helping to create happy smiley patients. And we've seen a lot of presentations over the past couple of days that have been absolutely at odds with that concept. We all know in this room that it's not necessarily about those pictures, but it's about supporting patients, building advocacy, and that would really support our brand. And the last is authority and transparency. Apparently we want to dictate, and again, we've seen some really good examples this morning of how we're trying to engage with healthcare professionals, how we're trying to build trust, and we know that by building trust, we can help drive medicine forward. So for me, how do we overcome some of these negative perceptions? How do we make sure that people don't think we choose profit over people, image over honesty, or authority over transparency? And it comes back to this concept. It comes back to this concept of who cares wins. And it comes back to this idea of absolutely focusing on the patient benefits, and if we do that, we'll be successful as a business. So why has it suddenly started to become relevant? What's the backdrop to this? And I think it's interesting to look a couple of years ago, and there was a huge barrier between individuals and information. People didn't choose their information sources. They were given information. They were very much consumers. They were isolated. Effectively, the company was king. We were the biggest, we were the loudest, we could be the bulliest. We could effectively define our image. The people who manufacture the treatments could also manufacture the image. So how are things now different? And I think the biggest point is that where we used to be these big king companies, we're very much now at the mercy of global communities. And that's been the massive shift. So what does that mean? What it means is that the people who used to be given information now actively can go and choose their information source. So it's no longer enough for us to just publish information. We've got to make sure that people believe it and people trust in it, as Shona spoke about this morning. But not only that, they're no longer an isolated individual. They're part of vibrant and engaged communities. We, about 10 days ago, were at EADV, and one of the things I thought was interesting about this is we were doing a social campaign, and some of the channels that we used were Facebook, as you'd expect, then there was some Twitter, we also were on Reddit, Pinterest, Flickr, and Thunderclap. For me, the most interesting thing about this concept is we didn't choose those channels. Those channels were absolutely chosen by our community. We were no longer driving it forward, we were reacting, and we were acting in a very, very effective way to drive the business forward. A concept that I'd like to take away, and you might have heard of this before, but the 21st century consumer is not that person who accepts being given information. It's that person who is empowered, who chooses the information sources, who reaches their conclusion and takes a platform to share it. The 21st century consumer, in my opinion, is a prosumer. They're informed, they're connected, and they're empowered. And this is the people that we're dealing with, and this is how we need to think differently and drive it forward. We very much used to believe in a policy of building brands on image, and one of the things that for me is interesting about this is the concept. We used to have brand values, we used to talk about integrity, we talked about pioneering, we talked about experience, and we were referring to brands, colours, tone, content. We absolutely should embody those values in our behaviour. It's not about building an image on brand and on image, it's about doing it on behaviour, which is really key. And I think one of the other important points about this is obviously in the new world, every single action is judged, and it's judged instantly. And one of the companies that suffered from this was BP. So obviously they had the Deep Horizon oil disaster, and it was horrific. But also what was horrific is the way that they responded. And with every single piece of communication, or lack of it, it got worse. There was a guy there called Leroy Stick, just an individual, was really unhappy with what BP were doing, and you had BP. They were very big, he was very small. He set up a Twitter handle at BP Global PR. He very quickly got 200,000 followers, and he was tweeting things like, safety is our primary concern. Well, profits, then safety. Oh, no, profits, image, then safety. But it's right up there. He got that instantly to 200,000 people. That's because BP weren't taking responsibility. They weren't saying what they believed or doing what they believed. So I guess the conclusion to this little section is, money is no longer enough to create an image, to create a brand. Size counts for nothing when you're up against a global community. And legacy, what you did last year or even before, counts for nothing. It's what you're doing today. If we want to earn our customer respect, we've absolutely got to start thinking differently. We need to start focusing on people. We need to start focusing on patients. What we do that's better for patients will absolutely be better for profit. We need to really embody the brand values. We need to be honest, because it will allow us to create the kind of image. We need transparency and we need trust, because with both we get authority. But I don't just want to talk about this as a challenge. I want to see this as an absolute opportunity. And one of the things I think is worth looking at is other sectors, and looking at other sectors who've both done the right thing and been very, very commercially successful. So I guess the underlying theme and the methodology for how this works is I kind of recognise that we can't just do the right thing. We're in this, we've got shareholders, we've got targets, we have to make profits. Likewise, it's no longer enough just to focus on kind of making money. We need to be smart, we need to be savvy, and we need to think about the future. And that's where we're mutually beneficial, where we have that marriage between doing the right thing and making money. And, if we look at some of the quotes from people like Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever, who talks about ethics and talks about these different aspects, he sees it as absolutely key. There are hard measures of growth and margin improvement. Wherever you look, it's a no-brainer. And I absolutely agree with that. And I don't want to use too many stats, but I thought this was a really thought-provoking one. And that's that almost 3/4 of consumers, there was 2,000 people who were surveyed for this, believe that big business has as much responsibility as government in developing a sustainable future. It's quite an interesting concept. So how does it benefit us? By doing the right thing, what do we stand to gain? We get to build brand equity. By doing the right thing, by being empathetic to our customers, we get that alignment. We get earned media, and really positive earned media. We're doing the right thing. People are talking about us. They're sharing it through the community. We're absolutely benefiting. It differentiates us. We're all aware that healthcare professionals in particular are very concerned with the ethics of our industry. If we are outwardly ethical, it will absolutely differentiate us and give us another point of sale. It also, and I'm going to talk about this, represents the opportunity for new revenue streams and new ways of looking at your business. So, why do we want to be better? Because fundamentally it's better for business. An amazing example of this is Marks & Spencer's Plan A, which was launched in 2007. For those of you that aren't aware, they had this great idea that they absolutely wanted to support a sustainable future. They wanted to improve climate change, waste. They really wanted to tackle these. Why? Because they didn't just want a quick facelift to their brand. They absolutely wanted to embody everything that they represent, both internally and also externally. They came up with this concept of 100 commitments. They envisaged it would cost them about £200 million a year to do this. That's what their brand was worth to them. Fast forward, they've seen a 23% increase in energy efficiency. They recycle 94% of their waste. They're absolutely doing good. More impressive, they've added £50 million to their net profit in 2010, £70 million to their net profit in 2011. They're absolutely doing the right thing, making money, building the brand. I think it's really thought-provoking, as you can see. The next thing is because we should do the right thing because people just don't want a product. They want something they can absolutely believe in. They want something that they can trust. So, going back to that stat that I showed you before, I think maybe it's interesting to think about consumers, healthcare professionals as citizens. Maybe they're voting in the way they're choosing the treatments that they're going to use. Perhaps it's not enough to have a quality product, perhaps we also need to think about an ethical incentive. I really like the concept of trying to inspire a sense of civil liberty or even commercial liberty. Brilliant example for this, for those of you that don't know, Tom's Shoes. They were launched in 2006. They had a great product. They also had a really good social idea, and it was one for one. So for every pair of shoes that was bought, they would give a pair of shoes to a child in need. Fast forward, since 2006, they've sold 10 million pairs of shoes, been massively commercially successful, and they've put the shoes on the feet of 10 million children in need. A fantastic example of doing the right thing, not just talking about it. So why be better, particularly for myself in the role that I do and the role that we'll do here? Because for me, communication is the absolute heart of this. Okay, so maybe we're building brand images in different ways, but all of the skills and the expertise that we have is absolutely at the heart of this success. We've got the ability to build global communities with platforms, with the exchange of information, empower people and drive forward in the development of treatments. We can curate clinical experience. You know, we're no longer limited by our geography. We can find out what's happening on a global scale, and that can only push medicine forward. The other thing is, we can think about how we do more than just the pill. We can think much more holistically, and I'm not talking about a patient support pack. I'm thinking about technology startups, how we partner with them, how we provide a much better, holistic standard of care for our patients. So, why be better? It's beneficial for business, which is obviously key. Our stakeholders, healthcare professionals, absolutely want someone they can partner with, someone they can trust, and communication is going to drive this forward. So it sounds really good, but how do we do it, which is what I'm going to focus on for the next bit of the presentation. And it's really a little bit of take of what I just showed you. So I recognise we can't be all about, and we have got stakeholders, and we have got shareholders, and we do have to hit our targets. It can't all be about moral drivers. But it's no longer good enough to just be all about sales. Everyone in this room needs to be smart, savvy, and develop campaigns and communication ideas that sit in this middle ground, this marriage between moral drivers and commercial drivers, which is what we call good pharma. So, how do we do this? First and foremost, we put patients at the heart of everything that we do. Why do we do that? We look at the number of stakeholders we're talking to. These guys have all got like different questions, they've got different agendas. You know, we have different stories for them, but the one common goal, they're all completely focused on the patient. So what should we be doing? We should be entirely focused on the patient. That's how we can build a really strong brand. Yes, we'll need to tailor the story around that, but what it gives us is complete alignment with our stakeholders by focusing on the patient. I've got an example of something that we did about 12 months ago, which is a really nice example of putting the patient at the heart of everything. So we're working with Janssen, and we developed a website called, or we relaunched a website, I should say, called Stop Hepatitis C. And at the time, they were creating a fantastic new treatment that was increasing cure rates from 40% to 80%. What we needed to do there was absolutely build awareness about this advancement. How did that help us? Well, it was going to help drive market growth. What was the concept? Make a promise and beat hepatitis C. So at the centre of this campaign was this international global website, and the context was this massive advancement, cure rates from 40% to 80%, needed to make people aware of that. They actually had a website that was already live. It was launched in 2007, and it talks about disease awareness, and it was pretty successful. It had like 3,000 visitors a month, which isn't too bad. What is horrific is it had a bounce rate of 72%, so pretty much everyone who came left immediately. So what were our objectives? We wanted to educate the patients about the new options available. We wanted to empower them to take an action, and we wanted to support them through the process. And what was great is we had really clear KPIs. We wanted to drive visitor actions, make them not just browse but do. We had to reduce the bounce rate, which was going to be fairly straightforward, and we had to increase site visitors. So how did we do that? We started with the patients. We absolutely got under the skin of the patients. We found out about the different groups. We found out about the triggers. We found out about the frustrations. We found out about the ambitions. We knew everything we wanted to know about that patient. It was who we focused on. We then looked at their journey. And when I say journey, I mean offline journey. We thought about their context, where they go, where they get the information from, some of the challenges we face. And then we thought about how we're going to create an online journey to complement that. How are we going to support the patient? What kind of tools, what kind of content are we going to create? The results, the bounce rate went from 72% to 8%, absolutely massive. The number of visitors went from 3,000 to 5,500. The people that completed an action, 27%. We created a fantastic tool for patients that was very, very beneficial to our business. So, number two, how else can we be better? Let's think about how we can possibly go beyond the pill. So again, interesting campaign. A few people have spoken about this in the past. In terms of schizophrenia, you know, it's an awful condition, and one of the biggest challenges is people maintaining their meds, taking it on a daily basis. Our campaign, our idea, was to think about how we could educate them to remember to take their pills. The benefits, we're going to have informed conversations. The campaign, shaping futures, giving people an ambition, something you could believe in, and allowing them to get there. What was the campaign made of? We talk about connected health. We thought about the stakeholders, we thought about the journey. So we knew that in this instance, the patient and carer, the first place they were going to go for information was Google. So we did a very, very successful search marketing campaign, got something like 50,000 visitors. But again, we focused on the patient, so we did something even better called seeding. We spent a lot of time and effort, and we identified 300, maybe 400 patient bloggers. We worked with them, we understood their challenges. We looked at our content, we looked at our tone, we looked at our tools, we got their buy-in. What did that allow us to do? It allowed us to work with them and create advocates. When we launched the website, they seeded it, they developed some fantastic, fantastic traffic. We also did some interesting things on YouTube with a viral campaign with Mark, and we watched his life spiral out of control over a day, and it froze, and we allowed the visitors to take control. How is it going to end? In the same way we want them to take control of their life. Moving through, we used social media. So we took Mark and we built a social campaign around him, and we allowed people to think of it as a soap opera and write their own soap. How is it going to end? What was going to be that goal and that ambition? We also, and for those of you that here last year I spoke about gamification, we created something called the Getting Better book. And we allowed them to talk about their ambitions. Maybe it's getting a job, you know, whatever it may be. It's quite a big, lofty ambition. We broke it down into smaller chunks. You know, get a new shirt, have a haircut, write your CV, and we really supported the patients to communicate their goals. Finally, we wanted to make sure that they had these empowered conversations. So we created tools like an adherence diary, a talk to your doctor conversation. Again, we thought about what it is the patient needs. The results, after 4 months, 200,000 visitors. More impressive than that, 1 in 5 had completed a campaign goal. What had they done? Over 7,000 people had completed an adherence questionnaire. 5,000 people had gone through a decision tree that helped them to talk about their ambitions. 6,000 people had printed off a booklet to have a conversation with a doctor. Beneficial to the patient, absolutely beneficial to the business. But more than that, I spoke about how we can use innovation to provide a more holistic standard of care. A brilliant doctor in Germany, his clinic had half the rate of relapse of the rest of the clinics in Germany. We took what he did, we digitised it, we rolled it out, and we're now supporting, you know, almost hospital days been halved in terms of this initiative. We look at the results. 30 markets chose to localise the campaign, really successful. In the clinical trial, hospital days were halved, and it picked up 8 innovation awards. A great example of focusing on the patient, delivering a commercial benefit. Moving through, the third point I think that's really, really important, and this has come across over the past day and a half, is it's really important to be transparent, honest, and it's really important to respond quickly. There is an amazing example of this that I'll come on to in a sec, but I think what's really key about this is the fact that we need to take responsibility for our actions. We need to behave in the way we expect to be behaved. We need to show absolute leadership, and we completely need to engage. We need to absolutely deliver honest communications. And there's an amazing example of this from the early 80s. For those of you that aren't familiar, a treatment called Tylenol in the US. It was Johnson & Johnson's leading brand at the time, and horrifically, unfortunately, in 1982, 7 people died when it was laced with cyanide. Obviously, at the time, the predictions were that that brand would never recover. The reality of the situation, it was back on the shelves in 2 months. Within 12 months, it had recovered from 7% low back up to 30%. So how did they do that? How did they respond so effectively to what was, you know, a very, very serious issue? They assumed responsibility. They took responsibility for the situation. They immediately recalled Tylenol. They immediately removed all advertising. They issued a very strong public statement, and they used all the media that was available to them at the time. They then went away and they rebuilt the brand. They innovated and created tamper-proof packaging. They restored confidence. They built relationships that they would not normally have through trust, through what they delivered. They issued another public statement, well received because of the way they behaved, and then they offered discounts. So spectacular to go from that situation where it fell the market share to 7% to recover in 12 months to 30% shows just how effective we can be when we behave in the right way. And the next is around share and use data. And I was at an event about 6 months ago, and I was facilitating a global innovation workshop for one of our clients. And as leader of these sessions, you're meant to arrive with the best ideas. That did not happen. There was a guy there from Japan who had possibly the greatest example of innovation, and I just hope I do it justice when I describe it. As we're all aware, a couple of years ago there was the earthquake and the tsunami in Japan, and one of the biggest challenges with that was the destruction that caused to the infrastructure, and particularly the roads. When they were trying to get emergency services and supplies to where it was needed most, it was incredibly difficult. Honda at the time had some great data. They could see their cars moving around the different roads. By doing that, they could see the roads that were blocked and those that were free. They mapped all of that data and they put it onto Google Maps so that everyone could see the roads that were working and how to get emergency supplies to where it was needed most. They did this all in 20 hours. So the fifth way, and this is the last, and that's all around collaborate to innovate. We work for organisations that are tremendous at making pills. That does not mean they are tremendous at technology. There is a real opportunity for us to be partnering with technology startups to be providing a much more holistic standard of care. Now, there's a fantastic example of this from the US, and there's an insurance company called Blue Shield Blue Cross, and what they wanted to achieve is some real, hard and fast business benefits. They were looking at going, how can we generate more revenue? How can we differentiate ourselves from our competition? How can we build brand equity? So they had this idea, it was called HealthBox. HealthBox was an incubator for technology startups. They were funding startups. So they were both improving patient outcomes and benefiting themselves as well. So just to kind of conclude, what does this look like moving forward? What are the kind of next steps? I think this is interesting. This is from a book, Who Cares Wins by David Jones, which is where a lot of these concepts have come from. And he compares the success of brands that are ethically focused versus their competition that are not. And we can see that really this is only going one way. And for me, the biggest point to take away is 15 years ago, the world got digital and healthcare were like, we're not going to bother. I'm absolutely hoping that in 10 years' time, we're not having a similar conversation about social good and the impacts it can have. We absolutely need to embrace that today and lead what we're doing. Why? If we look at technology, I thought this was quite a good stat. Facebook didn't exist 7 years ago. iPhones, 6 years ago. Pinterest, it didn't exist 3 years ago. There is only going to be more exchange of information, more data available, ultimately more prosumers, which is why we need to think differently. And really, just to conclude, for me, we are entering started 12 months ago, a new age of trust and respect. Stakeholders, by that I mean the healthcare professionals, the payers, the nurses, they're absolutely looking for people they can trust. How do they trust us? It's not just about pushing information out, it's about embodying our brand values and behaving in the correct way. They're also seeking much more holistic help. We have the opportunity and the insight to identify these technology startups and really deliver on that promise. And how do we do that? We absolutely start and think differently. We look at the patients and we drive it kind of forward. And this is what I just really take away. And this is this concept of like good pharma. It's about everyone in this room really focusing on what we're doing and making sure that our ideas are in the middle. Because ultimately what's better for patients, I absolutely believe, is better for business. And to conclude, these are just some interesting articles and some books and some different blogs that I've read which kind of help finish on that. So thanks a lot.
We have a question from, again, the Twitter sphere. What do you say to companies who say, I'd love to look at the long term, I can see the advantages of all this social responsibility and the returns I'll get, but I need to think about my short-term P&L?
We're in a really fortunate position where we've got some pretty brilliant case studies. I mean, if you look at the work that I just showed you then in schizophrenia and the work in hepatitis C, they absolutely beautifully present about how focusing on the patient, having a long-term strategy has completely benefited their business. They're obviously not the only case studies, so we do have, I'm sure you have as well, some really good examples to convince people to do this. I really liked that point around, we need to do this now and not do what we did with digital. I know we're at DigiPharm and stuff, so that's bad, but that's one of the key things.
Last question?
Yeah, I really liked the great talk and some of the examples were brilliant. I thought we were going to show the new Japanese NSX advert. Have you seen this?
No.
It's an advert of their top-of-the-range supercar boiling kettles. So look it up on YouTube.
Cool.
But what they're showing is that you can have power when power disrupts. So they're really extending on that model, and it just shows how different a company
Yeah, I mean the Honda video doesn't really do it justice. I just thought it was a jaw-droppingly amazing example of seizing the moment, combining it with innovation, and just doing something that is worth more than any advertisement campaign in terms of building their brand values.
Okay, well, it's now lunchtime, so thank you, David, and thank you, Xavier.